Welcome in, one and all. That is the Sunday Night Football theme. If you haven't already figured that out by now, what I like to do is once in a while I'll change things up when it comes to the intros, especially when it comes to the National Football League. That's one thing I don't need a phone for. I do use a phone and a tablet, but whenever it comes to football, I always like to have a little bit of intro music when it comes to there, when I'm displaying the teams on the screen. So if you haven't already figured it out by now, what I'd like to do is do reviews and previews. And now I'll be doing a review of week number 16 of the NFL season. What I'm going to do is go through all the teams that I thought would win, who actually won, and by the end of the video, I will have my weekly record and my overall record uh, for the NFL season. So coming into week number 16, I was 125 and 79, 125 right, 79 incorrect. So we'll see how I do after the 16 games that I will be reviewing from this past week. So starting with the Thursday night matchup between the New Orleans Saints and the Los Angeles Rams, I did predict that the Rams would get the victory. It was close. 30-22 would be the final score from Los Angeles. So with that, the Rams have now improved to 8-7. They have moved into a playoff wild card spot. There's only two teams that have 8 wins in the wild card, and the others have 7 or less. So it's pretty crazy to think that a lot of teams that will be making it into the postseason might end up with 8, 9 wins, respectively. Whereas the AFC, a lot of teams have like 9, 10 wins. So it's like if you only have 6 or 7 wins, chances of making the playoffs are very scarce on the other side of the conference. All right, so there were 3 games on Christmas Eve, and I will be looking at those games, starting with the AFC North, where we have the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they were playing host to the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, I'm very much aware that Joe Burrow is not in the lineup, but the Bengals have been playing well up until this point. Uh, when they played the Steelers, I did predict that the Bengals would get the victory, but unfortunately, it was not meant to be. Pittsburgh prevailed with a 31. Whoa, that score can't be right. It's a 31-11. No, hold on a second. I gotta review this. I may have wrote down that score wrong, so just please bear with me. I'll get some music on the TV so it's not sitting here listening to me breathing. I gotta double check that score. 31-11 does not seem correct. Unless it's 34-11. Either way, it seems like I screwed something up there. Straighten that out a little bit. Wow. I wish I had wrote that down correctly, then I wouldn't be doing this. All right, let's take a look and double check the score from that game. Either way, the Steelers won, so I got that pick wrong. Both the Steelers and the Bengals are now sitting at 8-7. 34-11. Okay, so they did have 11 points. I just didn't write down the 34 properly. So 34-11. So the Steelers won by 23 points. They've now put themselves in a very good spot for a wild card position. Second game from that Saturday afternoon took place in Los Angeles, where we have the host team and the Chargers, and they were playing against one of the hottest teams in the AFC and the Buffalo Bills. So I did bet that the Bills would get the victory. It was a very close one. 24-22 would be the final score in this matchup. So with that, the Bills are now improved to 9-6. Again, increasing their chances of making it into the postseason. They're now just trailing the Dolphins by 2 games, so I will get to them in just a sec for a AFC East crown. So at best, they should be able to pull off a victory or two in their last 2 games and prevail and see some postseason action. As for the Chargers, they've now been officially eliminated, sitting at 5-10. Like I said, the only way they could win out or get into the postseason would be if they won their last 2 games and everybody else finished with an identical 7-10 record. But again, a lot of those head-to-head contests, if another team happened to have the same record as the Chargers and they beat them, then they'd obviously beat out. So I'm almost like 99.9% certain that there will not be any postseason action in LA, Chargers-wise. All right. Next matchup takes place in Mile High City, where we have the Denver Broncos, and they were playing host to the New England Patriots. So I think a lot of teams knew that the Patriots had really good defense. I don't think they would have guessed they'd be able to pull this one off. But then again, no one would have guessed they would have beaten the Steelers just a week ago. So this is where we're at, unfortunately. So I think a lot of people bet, like myself, that the Broncos would be able to get the victory. They were not able to. 26-23 would be the final score in this one. So with that, the Patriots are now 4-11. Again, no postseason action for them. As for the Broncos, they have now fallen to 7-8, and their chances of making the playoffs are getting slimmer and slimmer as the season comes to an end. The only way they can get into the postseason is if they win out their last two games against the Chargers and Raiders, respectively. But then again, you have to rely on other teams that are ahead of you to also lose out the season. And if it comes down to the Texans and the Broncos for the last wildcard spot, well, obviously the Texans already beat the Broncos. There's a lot of teams that, again, just because you have the same record, the tiebreaker is going to ensure whether you're in or out of the playoffs. So I want to say that their chances of making the playoffs right now are extremely slim. And this would be almost a full decade since they've seen postseason action. 9 consecutive seasons if they don't pull this one off. All right, on to Sunday's action, where we have the Atlanta Falcons, and they were playing host to the Indianapolis Colts. Okay, so in this matchup, I did predict that Atlanta would win. They actually blew out the Colts by 19 points. 29-10 would be the final score in this one. So with the victory, Atlanta is now they're now sitting at 7-8. They're just a game back in that a game back against the Buccaneers for that top spot in that very weak NFC South. Or if you look at the other side, they can also position themselves in a NFC wildcard spot as, like I said, one of the teams that are in the 7th position only have 7 wins. So should the Atlanta Falcons win out their last 2 games, and any teams that are around that 7-8 win window happen to lose out their last 2 games, the Falcons can easily sneak in to a wild card spot. That NFC is just completely wide open when it comes to the wild card positions, whereas the AFC, you have a pretty good idea about like the 4 or 5 teams that are in that comfort zone. But as for the NFC, there could be a lot of teams positioned from like 5 or 6 to 7. It's unreal. All right. So with the loss, the Colts they dropped to 8-7, but again, not a huge panic because they're still in the thick of things in that AFC South, as they're not only in a wild card position as we speak, but if they happen to win their next game or their final game, and say the Jaguars go on a 1 or 2 game losing streak, they could easily see themselves as the home team and the number 4 seed in that AFC. So not all hope is lost for both of these teams. All right, staying in the NFC South, we have the Carolina Panthers, and they played host to the Green Bay Packers. Now, this was a very close game, to say the least. The Packers almost let this one slip away. They squeaked out a victory, just a 2-point differential in the score, as the final score would be 33-30. So just they just narrowly won by a field goal. And considering the Packers are still in a playoff position, this was a game that they should have had in the bag. But Panthers, you can't deny it that they're playing spoiler for the rest of the year. They've already known that they've been eliminated for like a month. So there's not really news if you're telling this team that, hey, you're not making the playoffs in 2023, 2024. They're just trying to play spoiler from here on out. Maybe there's a few teams they can upset and then ruin their chances of getting into the postseason. So had they pulled this victory off, I'd say the Packers' playoff chances are like out. But because they have won, the Packers are now sitting at 7-8. And like I just talked about with Atlanta, a lot of teams only have 7-8 wins for a wild card position. So anything can happen within the next 2 weeks when it comes to positioning in the postseason. All right, the next matchup takes place in Texas, where we have the Texans, and they're playing host to the Cleveland Browns. So I did predict that Houston would get the victory, but the Browns just absolutely showed up on Sunday. I'm not going to lie to you. This was a crazy game. Amari Cooper had like over 250 yards receiving, 2 touchdowns. That trade's looking a little one-sided right now between the Browns and the Cowboys at this moment. So with the victory, the Browns have now improved to 10-5. 10-5. I can almost guarantee they're going to be locked in at that number 5 position, get the first wild card spot, because no other team I don't think is going to catch up to the Browns. A lot of teams only have 8 wins in that AFC wildcard spot. So if you only have 8 wins, again, you'd have to win out your last 2 games. Hopefully, the Browns can lose their last 2 games. And the way the Browns are playing, I would not count on them losing out on their last 2 weeks of the season. So they have improved to 10-5, a very good record, while the Texans have dropped to 8-7. But again, the Texans, Jaguars, Colts, all 3 of those teams can easily not only claim that AFC South title, but all 3 teams could almost realistically make postseason, with 1 getting the home game and 2 in the wild card spots. All right, off to New York, where we have the Jets, and they played host to the Washington Commanders. So I did predict that Washington would get the victory. It was close. 30-28 would be the final score in this one in favor of the Jets. With that, the Jets they're now sitting at 6-9, but unfortunately they're not making the playoffs. They have been eliminated as of last week. And as for the Washington Commanders, they've been eliminated for quite some time. They have now dropped to 4-11. All right, the next one takes place in the NFC North, where we have the Minnesota Vikings, and they're taking on the Detroit Lions. So just to make things interesting, I did predict the Vikings would get the victory, only because I wanted to see this come down to like a week 17, week 18 thing, where one of these teams could still be fighting for an NFC North title. But the Lions put that all to bed as they came away with the victory. 30-24 would be the final score in this one. So with that, the Detroit Lions improved to 11-4. They have now clinched the NFC North title for the first time since like 92-93, back when they were in the NFC Central Division. So this is their first ever NFC North crown, and I'm sure Lions fans around the NFL are just loving life at the moment. Despite the loss, the Minnesota Vikings, they have dropped to 7-8. But again, if they happen to win out their last 2 games, they could easily sneak into a wild card spot with an 8-9 record. So, yeah, it's tough to lose. But again, when that NFC is so weak that teams could have 7-8 wins, make the postseason, they're very much alive. And I'm not going to lie. All right, the next matchup takes place in Nashville, where we have the host Tennessee Titans, and they're taking on the Seattle Seahawks. So the Titans, obviously, they've been officially eliminated. Coming into this matchup, they were sitting at 5-9. They did lose, so now they have dropped to 5-10. The Seahawks got a big victory. 20-17 is the final score. I should have mentioned that at the start. They have now improved to 8-7, and they are now sitting at the 5th or 6th spot when it comes to the wild card position. So as long as they can win out at least 1 or 2 more games, they're almost securing a postseason berth for this upcoming playoffs. All right, now we're off to Florida, where we have the Battle of Florida. Well, technically only 2 out of the 3 teams played against each other. And the Jacksonville Jaguars, who were the away team, I apologize, and they were taking on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So I did predict that Tampa would get the victory, and they sure did. 30-12 would be the final score. They won by 18 points. With the victory, the Buccaneers have now gotten above 500 for the first time in quite some time. They're now sitting at 8-7, and despite the loss, the Jaguars are also sitting at 8-7. I'll just talk about the Jaguars for a quick sec, then I'll jump back on the Buccaneers momentarily. So for the Jaguars, yeah, it's a tough loss, but again, because that AFC South is so weak, you're almost guaranteeing the winner of that division is going to get that number fourth seed in the AFC playoffs. So the Jaguars still have hope. The Colts and the Texans, all three of those teams are fighting for that AFC South title. And just like I talked about with the other two teams, or with the Texans at least, that all three of those teams could easily make the postseason. It's crazy to think that you can have three teams from your division making the playoffs. It's just mind blowing. Technically, you could have four because there are three wildcard positions, but the Titans have already been eliminated. So at best, there could be three teams represented from the AFC South in this year's postseason. Now, getting back to the NFC with the Buccaneers, they are in first place once again for the first time. It feels like forever. And I know, I can almost guarantee this, that if they are to secure an NFC South championship, they would be locked in at the number 4 spot, as I don't think they're catching the likes of the 49ers or the Lions or the Eagles. All those teams are already in double-digit wins, so it'd be very tough for them to catch up and get a number 3, a number 2, or a number 1 spot in the NFC South. And if the Buccaneers happen to not get in as the host team, they could easily sneak in as a wild card team. As I've said several times, and I'm going to sound like a broken record, they could easily be a wild card team if they do not win out the remaining of their schedule. All right. Now we're off to the Windy City, where we have the Chicago Bears, and they're playing host to the Arizona Cardinals. So I don't want to be spoiler on this one, but both these teams have been eliminated from the postseason. The Arizona Cardinals were coming into this matchup sitting at 3-11. They did unfortunately lose. The final score was 27-16 in favor of the Bears. They have improved to 6-9, but you got to think it's very unlikely that the Bears are going to win out their last 2 games when there's teams ahead of them in that conference. So I guess they technically have not been eliminated as of just yet, but I just feel that it's going to be very hard for them to make it, win out their last 2 games, when I just previously said how there's other teams ahead of them that already have 7-8 wins. I don't see the other teams ahead of them losing out their last 2 games this season. So I truly believe, even though it was a great victory for the Bears, I don't see them making the postseason in 2023/24. All right, now we're off to Miami, where we have the host team and the Dolphins, and they were playing against the Dallas Cowboys. Quite possibly the game of the week, I'm not going to lie to you. Very exciting, went back and forth. I did predict that Miami would get the victory. It was a narrow one, 22-20 would be the final score in this one. So with the victory, the Miami Dolphins have secured a playoff spot guaranteed. They have improved to 11-4, and despite the loss, the Cowboys are still 10-5. At best, they should finish with the number 1 wildcard spot if they don't win their division. They're only a game behind the Eagles, so anything can happen within the next 2 weeks. But I'm sure if you're a Cowboys fan, you would have preferred the victory, then you would have still been at the top of that division. So I'm sure it was a tough pill to swallow. But if you finish as a wildcard team, you're more than likely playing a team from the NFC South. And I can almost guarantee you can book your ticket to the divisional round if you do happen to play any of the teams from that said division. All right. The next matchup takes place in the AFC West, where we have the host team in the Kansas City Chiefs, and they were playing against the Las Vegas Raiders. So I was bold on this one. I did predict that the Raiders would get the victory, and they did. A big upset, to say the least. The final score on this one, 20-14. So with that, the Las Vegas Raiders have now jumped up to second place in their division, sitting at 7-8. I don't want to get my hopes up. I'm a Broncos fan, but I don't get my hopes up for the Raiders to make the postseason. But they technically have not been eliminated, just like the Broncos. But 7-8 going into the last 2 weeks of the season is looking very scarce, especially when other teams already have 8, 9, 10 wins respectively in that conference. As for the Chiefs, it looked like it was going to be a lock in that they were going to be a Super Bowl contender coming into this season, especially after they won it just a season ago. But after the loss, they're sitting at 9-5. Now, not all hope is lost. It's almost guaranteed they're still going to get that division. It'd be very hard for me to think that this Chiefs team would lose out their last two games and the Raiders or Broncos win out their last two games to tie their record in that division. So I'd be very surprised if the Chiefs lost their last two games. They should win out at least one or two of those games. But very shocking season to say the least. Inconsistency. I think I read a stat that they said they lost the last two of the three, the last three out of their four, or last five of their six, something crazy like that. It's hard to believe that they've been so streaky when they've been so consistent and so competitive for the last like 5 or 6 seasons. All right, now off to Philadelphia, the city of brotherly love, where we have the Eagles, and they were playing host to the New York Giants. So I had a funny feeling about this pick that I did predict the Giants would get the victory, only because coming into this matchup, the Eagles had lost 3 games in a row, and they were tough losses to say the least, especially that 49ers game where they got absolutely blown out of the water. So I went against the grain. I bet against the Giants, and they got close. They lost by only a single score, 33-25 would be the final in this one. So with that, the Giants have dropped to 5-10. Pretty much you can count their goodbye. It'd be very tough for them to make it into the postseason with a 7-10 record. I know I have talked about how there's teams, or at least one team that's in the 7th seed with 7 wins. But again, in order for the Giants to catch up to them, they'd have to win out their last 2 games. And there's no gimmies in the NFL. So I think there's like a 99% chance that the Giants are not making the season. As for the Eagles, a huge, huge victory for this team. They finally got back on the win contest after going 3 weeks without a W. So a huge victory. They have jumped back into first place in their division. So as long as they win out one of their last 2 games, they should claim their second NFC East crown. And the last game takes place in California, where we have the San Francisco 49ers, and they played host to the Baltimore Ravens. So I did predict that the 49ers would get the victory only because they looked like they were so dominant, only for them to get dominated and lose by 14 points. 33-19 would be the final score in this one. So with the victory, the Ravens have now improved to 12-3, being the best team in that AFC. And despite the loss, the 49ers, they are at 11-4. So there's a lot of teams in that NFC that have 10-11 wins. So it's going to be a dogfight all the way until the very end, in my opinion, whoever gets that number 1 overall seed. As for the Ravens, I think that if they get a victory next week, they very well could get a first-round bye, as I'm just trying to think that the Chiefs only have 9 wins, the Jaguars only have 8 wins, and the closest team to them would be in the AFC East, and that is the Miami Dolphins. And they're technically, I think, a game behind the Ravens at this point. So if the Ravens happen to win up one of their last 1 or 2 games, they'd almost guaranteed would be secure in a first-round bye when it comes to the wild card weekend. All right, so for this past week, my record was 9 wins and 7 losses. So my overall record after 16 weeks of the NFL season is 134-86. So I have a funny feeling I'm going to finish above 500. Even if they go 0-16 the next 2 weeks, that'd still only be 32 losses. So yeah, I think I'm okay. I should be able to finish above 500 with my picks and for the NFL season. All right, that was quite the long review, almost half an hour. As always, if you're new to this channel and you like this type of content, feel free to hit the sub button. I'd be very grateful and very appreciative as well. And as always, take care.